And we're back.
We're back, San Francisco.
Jeremy and Andrew here with this week's recap of the newest WandaVision episode 5. So we're going to jump right into that. This week's episode, started off...
It had a lot.
Yeah, it had a lot and very hard to follow, but it started off with an 80s sitcom intro, specifically mimicking at the very beginning family ties with the painting of the picture, and then segued into somewhat of a growing pains type of intro of showing the characters aging up to their current age. And then from there, wrapping up with a callback to Full House with the picnic scene on the lawn, and then ending again with a growing pains type thing with the family picture. So that was our intro for this week's episode, and it starts off like all 80s sitcoms do when there's new kids in the house. It's complete chaos. Like, there's babies crying, Wanda and Vision don't know what to do, everything's just this crazy, and it's chaotic, and that's basically the whole episode is chaotic because right from the get-go, they're not knowing what to do with the kids. Their neighbor that shows up to their house all the time shows up again. I always forget her name, but she shows up again.
Oh, is it Agnes?
It might be. Agnes? I think it's Agnes. I think you're right. So Agnes shows up to the house and with hey, I was going to go jazzercise, but I can help you out with your kids. And Vision is like very much like, no, like, let's not do that. This is weird. And that's when things kind of start falling apart because apparently in Agnes's mind, there was a script to be followed and she was supposed to help out with the kids, but Vision's not letting her. So she doesn't know what to do and makes a comment to Wanda of, should we take it from the top? And Vision's thrown off then and is trying to figure out what's going on. And so some funny babysitter humor type stuff happens. And then out of nowhere, the twins disappear. And Wanda and Vision have been arguing this whole time. They turn around, the twins have aged themselves up to like 5 years old. And now they're not crying anymore and things are easier. And everyone acts like it's just normal, except for Vision. Yep. Vision's like, what in the heck is going on? And
Vision's still... He's still operating under the we can't be discovered for our powers rules.
Yep. And so the rest of the episode then, from Wanda and Vision's standpoint, is a lot of crazy things happening that don't make a lot of sense, especially from us, from the viewer. But Vision is like the voice for us as the viewer, saying like, this isn't, like, this type of stuff doesn't happen in the same day. Like, our kids don't age up to 5, and then later, because they want to have a dog, and we tell them they have to be 10 to have a dog, age themselves up to 10 years old. That doesn't happen. And then on top of that, losing the dog, or getting the dog, because the kids brought a dog into the house, and they wanted to keep it, and that's, like, blah, blah, like, typical 80s show. And the dog gets lost, and they go to find the dog, and twist, though, this normally doesn't happen in an 80s show, the dog dies. And then... like, that's one of the things that Vision talks about, is that doesn't happen in a day in real life. You find and lose a dog in the same day. And so it leads to Wanda and Vision arguing back and forth, and even using their abilities, floating up into the air, and they're very much in an argument. And that's what's going on. At the same time, because now that we had the reveal from last week of what was going on in the real world during all this stuff, this episode cuts back and forth between the real world and Wanda's world, or WandaVision.
Yeah, it cuts back and forth a lot. It's hard to keep track of what happens when. Like, all the stuff that happens with Wanda and Vision is interspaced with all these different vignettes of the outside world.
Yeah. And in these vignettes, you see more of what happened with Monica now, since she got launched out, she's got more of her mind about her, of what's actually real, and where she's been, and interacting with the director that we've met in the previous episode, and everything that's going on in that world is they're trying to figure out more now. Okay, now that we know more information, how do we interact with the world? What's going on? And and Wanda is starting to be portrayed in our world, well, in the real world, as being the person that's not the victim, but the victimizer, and that's created this world and taken all these people hostage, and they need to do something to stop it. A lot of things happen in the real world, like Andrew said. Very hard to keep track of all of it. There's just a lot of interaction, but the big moments that happen is they decide to send a 80s drone into the world, because Monica figures out if we send something that's from the era that's in the show, it won't get changed. Similarly to like how our modern day drone got changed into something to fit within the 50s world or 60s world, whatever it was in that one. But so the drone doesn't change at all, and and Monica tries to talk to Wanda, and it's not really working, and Wanda's getting upset. And of course, the government people, being government people, decide to shoot a missile at Wanda. And that ticks off Wanda. And for the first time, she leaves her world and comes out to where all the sword people are, tosses them their drone, and also, very interestingly, wearing her modern day clothing that we've seen her in all the movies, and has an interaction with the director and all the people, where the director is just not being nice at all and is pretty much threatening like to destroy Wanda, and accusing her of all these horrible things. And Wanda responds in kind and takes over all the minds of all of his goons and has them point their guns at the director, and basically says, "Leave me alone or there will be consequences," and goes back into her world. And Monica did try to defuse the situation and tried to talk with Wanda and appeal to her good side, and don't know what's going to happen with that. But that was the big climax with both worlds in this episode. But the way the episode ended was Vision and Wanda are having their conflict and fighting, and the doorbell rings, and Vision thinks Wanda did it because just to stop the argument. She claims she didn't, and so she gets up to go answer the door, and the door opens, and there's someone standing there. We don't see who it is until it shows the back of the person's head, and then spins forward, and it is her dead brother, Pietro, but played by a different actor. So that was the way the episode ended. So Andrew, what was your thoughts on this episode?
Oh man, this episode was challenging. It's weird. I didn't care for this episode all that much for a couple different reasons, but like I felt probably the most strongly about this episode, but I didn't like dislike it as much as I disliked the first two episodes. It's very odd. On paper, I should have really liked this episode. It had the perfect mix of seeing what's happening inside of the WandaVision show, seeing how we're kind of pushing back against the facade of that show, and then seeing what's actually happening in the real world. I really loved how those different ingredients mixed together, but I was not I'm not a fan of where they're taking Wanda's character. Because like you said in the review, the recap, she is clearly made out to be kind of the victimizer here rather than a victim like we were sort of initially thinking she was going to be. And she's very much, we're continually setting her up to be sort of the villain of this story. And something about that sort of is rubbing me the wrong way. And I think a lot of times in media, like in movies and TV, women who are grieving or otherwise like having strong emotional responses, who are also in power, tend to be made the bad guys at certain points. I think we most famously saw that with Daenerys from Game of Thrones. I think everybody knows by now, by the end of the last season, she has become the villain of the show basically because she went crazy because of all this dumb stuff, and it was just really poorly handled. And I feel like we're starting to veer a little bit into that territory with Wanda, and something about that is just really rubbing me the wrong way. We're not fully there yet, and I'm hoping there's still a chance to pull out of that nosedive, as it were. I would be really interested to see kind of a feminist critique or a feminist reading of this episode, just to see, from that particular point of view, what that take on Wanda would sort of look like. So overall, not a huge fan of this episode. I'm still with the show. I still want to see where it's going to go, and I still think they could do some interesting things with it, but I think they're starting to play a little bit too much into a stereotype that I'm not a big fan of. What were your thoughts, Jeremy?
I think this is one instance where we actually do agree. I enjoyed the episode from a stance of just a continuation of the story, because we get to see more. There's more nuggets. Like, you just know more what's going on. But yeah, it's hard because of, like, there's things happening with the characters that we've known these characters for a while, and it just things don't seem to line up with who these characters are fully, and that's part of what kind of is frustrating. Like, we are seeing more of the Vision character becoming more what we're used to from the movies, of what he really showed, being more ethereal type and more scientific and running the calculations and all that stuff. He's becoming seems to be more who he was. But yeah, the way that Wanda's being painted right now it just kind of makes me feel icky. Like,
yeah,
she, especially because it almost reinforced the thought that I brought up 2 episodes ago of, oh wait, no, it was last week's episode, of that she's potentially just animating Vision's dead body. And
yeah,
that really made me feel gross, because it's like it showed that she went and got his body from the lab that it was in and took it. And apparently that was even in his will, that he did not want his body to be, like, he wanted it to stay wherever it was put, because he didn't want his body to get put into the wrong hands. And so it's like she went against his will, apparently, and all these things. It just made me feel like, like, this is not, I understand she's grieving, but it's being painted in such a way where, like, she's the bad guy now, and that's not who she's supposed to be. And I mean, there's some thoughts you can put into that based off comics, but it's just from a episode standpoint, it's one of those where I just feel gross continuing on right now, where, like, again, like you said, I'm still with the show. I want to see what happens, but it's just one of those where it's like, I feel for Vision, because he's so oblivious, because he doesn't remember anything beyond being in Westview, so he doesn't know anything that's happened to him, and it just kind of feels like he's in an abusive relationship. And that just is, you don't like to see your protagonist heroes doing things like that. And so, I mean, that's kind of how I felt watching it. I beyond just being confused because of how much things went back and forth, but that's kind of like, it's this morally gray area that they've put into this show that is not MCU at all. This is very new. But it's living within that morally gray right now, is where it's starting to become a little too much for me, where I'm like, I want to know, I want to see something switch.
Yeah, that it is interesting how much the show is going into that, and that's why the only reason why I think we're going to come out of it on the other side, because the MCU has traditionally not been a morally gray universe. Usually we know who the bad guys are. Like, there's been some levels of nuance here and there, but we generally know who the bad guys are and who the good guys are, and we don't see a whole lot of, like, steps in between there. So I'm hoping that this is just a little bit of misdirection, and that we're not quite getting the full story just yet. But yeah, if you take this episode on face value, it's a bit icky.
Yep. And I think that's when we get to the end of the show, depending on how things go, that will make either this ickiness go away or still be there. But I have to give kudos to the creators of the show and Kev and the people behind it for the fact they're willing to go into this, because nothing else has done this yet. So I will, even though I feel icky at the same time, I'm like, okay, like, yeah, like, good job for taking the risk, because you guys do normally do a good job when you take a risk. And speaking of risks, I know everyone's probably been wondering, why in the world have we not mentioned probably the biggest thing that came out of this episode? But the reveal at the end for me was my favorite part of the episode, and it got me the most hyped up. And I freaked out and looked over at my wife and went, "Look who it is!" It was like just tapping like her leg and like, ah, like, yes, the reveal of Pietro Quicksilver being in the show was a big reveal in itself, but the big twist of it was that it was not the original actor who played Quicksilver in the MCU. It's the guy who played Quicksilver in the Fox X-Men movies. So there's a lot of theories that we could go into about that. So I got to start off with the theory of just with Quicksilver, because that was the biggest thing here, and we have no idea what's going on. If anybody's read anything online about things that are coming out in the future, I'm not going to touch a lot of that, because this is theories about this show, not theories about the whole Marvel universe and what's coming in the future. But the fact that this is the actor that played Quicksilver in the Fox X-Men movies makes you wonder, does that mean that they're going to start merging those universes together, and it's based off something that's going on with Wanda? Because the thing that I've said before in previous videos for our recaps is that I think there is someone influencing things in the background, and this kind of reinforced that some, because Wanda seemed surprised that her dead brother was there, and she also didn't recognize him. So yeah, it's very much seems like somebody else brought him into this world. Wanda didn't bring him here, because that's one thing I didn't mention during the recap, but her brother got mentioned a lot in this episode, of just like her kids bringing him up, the grief that she dealt with that. I mean, the commercial that they had in this episode that was for Lagos paper towels was a call to when Wanda surrounded the guy that was exploding and lifted him up, and it blew up the building that created the Sokovia Accords. Like there's so many things that tied into her grief and the mistakes she's made, and it very much was put more so of talking about her brother and how she felt about that. And so to have the reveal at the end, like it was clear she didn't do it. Like, at least that's the way it was portrayed, that she wasn't the one who did it. So that reinforces for me the theory that somebody else is playing this game as well, and he's probably going to escalate things even more in some capacity. I will say with that, one of the things that made me laugh was when Darcy commented,
"She recast Pietro?"
Like,
that was pretty good.
It's like only us, like good. You mentioned this before we recorded, but only us would have gotten that as the audience because of watching all the different stuff. But it was a nice little call to all of us watching of like, yeah, break the fourth wall.
Yeah, that was a pretty good moment. I think at the very least, this seems to confirm that there's some sort of multiverse type event happening, and that there's some sort of confluence of the spheres, if you will, if you want to pick up Witcher terms there, where we're starting to have some universes smashed together. So I think we're going to start to see elements of the X-Men start to bleed into the MCU, which is pretty exciting. Yep. Considering that the X-Men were kind of the whole reason that any of this is here for a lot of people, you know?
Well, Spider-Man would really be the one that did that first, but
I've heard it both ways.
Sure. It's a group effort. It's a group effort.
But like, well, I was gonna say the one thought I did have is that I guess there is that chance that Wanda did it subconsciously, Like, I would be very intrigued, actually, if... Ooh, I just now had this thought. So this is a brand new theory, brand new theory popping up during this video.
I have an idea!
Is what if Wanda did create this world and the world itself is becoming sentient? And that the world, because it's based off of Wanda's emotions, has decided to bring her brother back, but they had to grab the only person that was still alive within all of a potential multiverse to be her brother again, because her brother was dead. Like, I just had that thought of what if it was the world itself is what brought her brother back, and it's because it's becoming bigger than Wanda can actually control. Because I think there might be some merit to that, because Wanda keeps on bringing up to Vision, I'm in control of all this. I know what I'm doing, and it's becoming very clear she is not in control anymore.
Yeah.
So I don't know. We'll see what happens.
Yeah. That is really interesting. You know, it's funny. I've been thinking a lot about the theories that you and I have put forward, and it's kind of shocking how many of our theories have been surprisingly correct. In particular, my stupid Sims theory that I came up with. I'm so angry that my Sims theory is actually kind of extremely correct, you know, minus the part of EA CEO coming out and announcing The Sims 5, which, hey, we've got like 4 more episodes still to go, so who knows. But yeah, Wanda is, like, you know, controlling all this to an extent. So yes, the Sims theory kind of still alive. It also sounds like they're gonna I think Monica mentioned something about bringing somebody in to sort of confront this whole situation. So my John Rambo theory is also still alive. So at this point, I'm done kind of throwing out stupid theories, because hey, why not? Why bother when the dumb things?
Yeah, at this point, anything is possible.
Yeah. So the only real theorizing that I have to do this week is actually serious theorizing. But I think there's more going on with Vision as he relates to Sword, because Sword was the one housing his body, right? That's what they say. And Sword is sentient weapon. Is it operations and research division? It's sentient weapon, whatever. But Monica mentions that it appears that they're creating weapons in a previous episode.
Yep.
So I think they were doing some questionable things with Vision's body as it relates to the sentient weapon program, and that's what made Wanda mad. That's what I'm hoping has happened, and not because and that she's not, reanimating him because she's grieving, but because that whatever Sword was doing was in much more direct contention to his will rather than what Wanda's doing. That's what I'm really hoping for, and really, really hoping that's the case, that's the more full story that we're gonna get. Really hoping for that. Please, Marvel, don't screw this one up. Please don't.
I would actually agree that I think there's a good chance of that, just because of all we saw was a video of Wanda coming in and taking his body. But the thing that I found interesting is that his body was split up into all of his different parts. It's like, if you're just housing his body so it doesn't get into the wrong hands, why do you have all of his body parts open like you're doing experiments on them?
Yeah.
So
exactly.
I would agree. I think what you're going to find out is Wanda actually found out that they were doing tests on his body, and that's why she goes and gets it. And that's where I think that's where something is. It's being portrayed the way it is right now to keep that kind of thing hidden, to where that will be an aha reveal that Wanda didn't create this world, but just because she was grieving and wanted to escape it, but there's a whole other reason behind it as well. And I think that's something we just don't know yet. That is, if she actually did create this world. I'm still holding out that someone else created it for her and she just gets to manipulate it. But yeah, I mean, as of right now, I don't think I have any other theories from where we're at. Like, it's just a more of a continuation of things we've mentioned before, along with my new aha theory. But how about you, Andrew? Do you have any other theories?
No, I would like to hear more about your aha theory, because I assume it has to do with some songs.
No, I mean, my aha theory was the one I already mentioned about being a possible sentient world now that's doing things on its own. So.
Yeah, I was making a joke on the aha guys.
Oh, I totally missed it and went, whoo.
Just gonna edit that one out.
So that will wrap up for us this week. Thanks so much for tuning in. Don't forget, hit like, comment below for sure with your thoughts, your theories. Still waiting to hear what your theories are. We haven't got anybody to tell us yet, so tell us your theories. And subscribe.
If you want to, subscribe if you want to send us praise for calling out the Sims thing early on. We'll accept that. Any criticisms that you have, you can tweet them to us at who's that really annoying QAnon lady that's in Congress? Whatever her Twitter handle is, you can tweet your criticisms to us there.
I've been Jeremy.
And I've been Andrew.
Thanks so much for tuning in. Don't forget, keep an eye on your health bar. Thank you so much for tuning into HitPoint. We hope this refilled your health bar and provided a much needed mental break. If you are new to the channel, don't forget to click the logo that's over my face. Or if you want more content, click here or here.